From time to time, after conducting a funeral or while traveling, I've been known to walk a bit and read headstones. Some are really sad. Perhaps the headstone marking the few days or months of the life of a child cut away too short. I remember Gladys, Drew, and I visiting Confederate Memorial Park in Mountain Creek, Alabama. It really struck us the number of headstones in one of the cemeteries there, which all listed the same winter as the time of death. A pretty bad flu epidemic had come through that year and took a severe toll on many of the senior residents there. You can learn a lot by visiting cemeteries. I recently read of another place just outside Florence, Alabama, where there lies the remains of an antebellum mansion called Forks of Cypress. The mansion was built in the 1820s by James Jackson, an early settler of northwest Alabama. About a quarter mile down a country road from those ruins lies the Jackson Family Cemetery. There's no sign marking the spot, only a 5-foot-high stone wall surrounding about 50 graves that make up the family plots. Inside there's a tall marker over James Jackson's grave with a long inscription extolling his virtues. Next to that, the marker for one of his sons. And on that marker there's a name, a date of birth, and a date of death, and a simple 5-word epitaph. A man of unquestioned integrity. 5 words to sum up an entire life. 60 plus years distilled into 5 words. But oh, what truth they tell. A man of unquestioned integrity. I can think of few better tributes than that. This morning, I would like us to look together in Daniel chapter 6 at a man of unquestioned integrity. Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom stationed throughout the realm, and over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. But they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, "We will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God." So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, "May King Darius live forever." All the administrators of the kingdom, the precepts, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document so that, as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. So King Darius signed the document. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in his upper room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. "Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any man who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "As a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable." Then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. As soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went to the king and said to him, "You as king know it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no edict or ordinance the king establishes can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of the dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God." The king said, "Has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke with the king, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't hurt me, for I was found innocent before him. Also, I have not committed a crime against you, my king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den uninjured, for he trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live in all the earth, "May your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion people must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. The king has decided to change his administration a bit. He's setting up 120 officials to run his kingdom, and over those he's appointing a few. And Daniel was one of those selected to have one of those positions of prominence. Now last week, as we were looking at Daniel, he was a young man with 3 young friends. And they had just been brought as captives into the nation of Babylon. And now as we take up the account, Daniel has been living faithfully and serving God faithfully and working diligently all of these years. He is now probably in his 80s. It's interesting, isn't it, that Daniel, a foreigner, an old man, and someone who worships in a way other than the accepted national religion, would be selected for such a position of prominence. But Daniel was a man of integrity. He was a man who would not compromise. And in every society, those types of people are rare and scarce and hard to find. The type of people that you know you can trust, that are going to be the same and talk the same and speak the same in front of you as they do behind you. The kind of people that you can trust your kingdom and all that you have into their hands. The good will rise to the top. And Daniel was such a man. Now sometimes leaders have blind spots. And sometimes they have prejudice or want to surround themselves with yes men. But the most successful leaders want to surround themselves with the best and the brightest. And Darius wanted to do that. So he selected Daniel, because he stood out. And there was a bit of jealousy, a bit of palace intrigue going on. The other leaders in the kingdom, they were jealous of Daniel's popularity. They were jealous of Daniel's ability. They were jealous of his closeness to the king. And they were looking for some way that they could cause a separation, a break between Daniel and the king, some way that he could fall out of favor and fall out of power so that they could assume his position. A lot of jealousy. So look there, if you will, in verse 4. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. But they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. These men said, we will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God. They looked for some way that they could accuse Daniel before the king, and what did they find? They found here a man who was faithful in his duties. He did what he was supposed to do when he was supposed to do it. His boss didn't have to worry about whether or not he would be spending too much time at the water cooler. He didn't have to worry about if he was overstaying his break time and staying too long in the break room. It was a man that was faithful to his duties. He understood what his responsibility was. God give us more God-fearing people who, when they go to work and are standing as models and examples and witnesses for the Lord Jesus Christ, who are faithful in their duties on the job, who will stand out from the pack and stand out from the crowd. It breaks my heart when I see people who go by the name of Christian and attend church Sunday after Sunday who are sorry employees. What a terrible witness they are for the cause of Christ and the kingdom of God. My word, if the Lord has called you to a position, if he has given you a job, then do the best at it you can. The Bible says to do it as unto the Lord, remembering that he is watching you. Daniel was faithful in his duties. He was also faultless in his character. They could find no compromises in his businesses or in his personal life. He did what was right, not because someone was watching him, but because it was right. He was the same person at work and at home and at church. He didn't have to put on an act anywhere for anyone because he was a person of integrity. He was the same all the time. I have a friend by the name of Robert Miller. I believe Doug recently met him. He works cameras and works for a Christian recording studio nowadays. He does a lot of television broadcasting. But there was a time when Robert Miller owned a concrete curbing company. You know, the people that come and put your concrete curbing around your flower beds and at your house. I was talking to him about it one time. I'm doing some work and at his house where he'd put the curbing around his house. He said, yeah. He said, a lot of my competitors, they put out the concrete and then they color it and imprint it over the top. He said, that's not the way we do it. I said, it's not. He said, no, we put our color all the way through the curbing. Because over time, the ground may settle or the tree roots may press it up and it may crack. And we want it the same color where it cracks as it is on the outside. The same color through and through. And that's the kind of person Daniel was. It didn't matter where he was or what he was doing. It didn't matter if he was with his friends or if he was at church or if he was at work. He was a person of integrity who spoke the same and acted the same and talked the same, no matter where he was. Daniel was faithful in his duties and he was faultless in his character. And third, he was fervent in his prayers. Evidently, he had had the custom for years of opening his window and praying toward Jerusalem. Perhaps he remembered the time when Solomon was dedicating the temple. And he asked the Lord, Lord, when your people, when you have to punish them and scatter them, when they turn and pray toward the temple, Lord, please hear their prayers and answer. And God said it would. So every day for years, 3 times a day, he'd open the windows to his room and he would face Jerusalem and he would pray to the God of Jerusalem, to the God of Israel, to the God of Abraham and Moses, the creator of all things. Oh, give us more praying people. Through prayer, churches have been resurrected and revivals have been brought and marriages have been healed. And prodigals have returned home and dreams have been interpreted. Finances have been provided. The sick have been healed. Rain has stopped. And families have been protected. God, give us more people who have a burden to pray. And who pray like they believe that they are praying to a prayer answering God. A God who isn't withholding or holding back on his children, but who is a loving Father in heaven, looking for opportunities and occasions to provide for his children. He prayed 3 times a day, and that's a lot of praying. Daniel lived a life of quality and excellence. What do you do when you find out there's a bullseye painted on your back? What do you do when you find out that the people at work are out to get you because they're jealous of you? What do you do when you find out that people at school are talking about you behind your back because of jealousy? Because you're doing well in your classes, because the guys or the girls find you attractive or popular. What do you do when you find out someone's out to get you? You keep doing the same thing you've always been doing. And Daniel didn't stop, and he didn't compromise, and he didn't change. It had been his custom for years to bow and to kneel and to pray to God 3 times a day. Perhaps that's why he had the courage to continue to pray, because he had that type of relationship with the Lord. He said, man, they can say what they want to. They can do what they want to. But I am not about to change for them. I believe Daniel was like his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A man who had no fear of dying. I remember working when I went to school in Monroe, Louisiana. I worked at a Brookshire's grocery store in the bakery. I worked there for about 1.5 years. I enjoyed it. I worked in several bakeries over the years. I enjoyed it. But I remember just a month or so before I was about to graduate and move back to Florida, the owner of Brookshire's decided that they were going to start opening on Sundays. They had a meeting. They called all of the employees into the back room, and we had a meeting back there. He said, we're going to start be opening on Sundays, and y'all are going to have to start taking turns. Now, what he didn't know was I was about to graduate in a month, and I didn't need that job. And so I told the manager of the bakery, look, you know, on Sundays you'll find me in church. You schedule me for Sunday, I won't be here. As a matter of fact, if it's an issue, I won't be here at all. It's kind of liberating when you're not worried about whether or not you have a job. It's also kind of liberating when you don't worry about whether you're going to live or die, when you have no fear. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, men of God. The king before said, if you don't bow down and worship my idol, then I'm going to cast you in the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, look, if our God wants to, he can save us. But we ain't really worried about it, whether he does or not. Either way, we come out ahead because we know what he has waiting for us. And Daniel, through the years of the relationship he had with the Lord, talking to him again and again throughout the day, day after day, had such a relationship, he wasn't worried about lions. He said, if the Lord saves me, that's a beautiful thing. But if he doesn't, that's even better. I'm reminded of Paul addressing the churches in the New Testament. He said, I don't care whether I stay or whether I go. If I go, I'm with the Father, but I guess it'll be better if I stay to serve y'all. Henry Blackaby, in his book, Discovering God, or Experiencing God, says one of the things that is necessary in order for you to determine God's will is to reach the point in your life where you have no will in the situation at all. You have to reach the point where in this situation, God, whether we do this or whether we do that, I'm trusting it all to you. I'm putting it in your hands. Daniel, with his closeness to the Lord, talking to him day after day, said, they can put me in there. And Lord, if you save me, that's fine. And if you don't, that's fine too. Because I'm your man. And you're my God. Well, you do if you're doing the right thing. And you're standing for God. And because of your faith and because you stand, you find the bullseye on your back. You keep on doing what you've been doing. And you trust and leave the results up to God. After the death of his wife, in 1681, Richard Baxter wrote these words, Lord, it belongs not to my care whether I die or live. To love and serve thee is my share, and this my grace must give. If life be long, I'll be glad that I may long obey. If short, yet why should I be sad to soar to endless day? Christ leads us through no darker rooms than he went through before. He that unto God's kingdom comes must enter by this door. Come, Lord, when grace has made me meet thy blessed face to see. For if thy work on earth be sweet, what will thy glory be? My knowledge of that life is small, the eye of faith is dim. But 'tis enough that Christ knows all, and I shall be with him. It was Dietrich Bonhoeffer who said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the face of America with these words. If a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Daniel had discovered something worth dying for, which is why he kept on praying when others would have quit. And since he wasn't afraid to die, he had the courage to live for God in a hostile world. Notice the outcome of Daniel's faithfulness. They ended up putting Daniel in a den of lions. The king didn't sleep very well that night. The Bible says that he fasted that night. He had no amusements brought before him. He had no dancers, no musicians. He didn't turn the TV or the radio on. He paced the floor, worrying about his best employee, his most faithful counselor. Now look, if you will, verse 19. At the first light of the dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel. Daniel, servant of the living God, the king said, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? What was the result of living a life of character? You'll have the opportunity to testify to God's faithfulness. Look there, verse 21. Then Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't hurt me, for I was found innocent before him. Also, I have not committed a crime against you, my king. My friends, if you are faithful and continue to walk with God, there will be opportunities for you to give testimony to the God that you serve and the God that you love and his faithfulness. Daniel had the opportunity to give testimony to the king. My God is faithful. And notice, if you will, the kind of life that Daniel lived in front of the king. The king came that morning and cried out, Daniel, has the God who you serve continually been able to deliver you? Daniel lived such a life in front of the king that the king had no doubt that Daniel was a man of God. He had no doubt what his priorities were, what his passions were. He knew that he could take Daniel at face value because for so many years he had watched Daniel day after day after day. And he knew that Daniel walked so close to the Lord that there was no compromise in him. He came crying in the morning, Daniel, has the God that you have served so faithfully been able to deliver you? And Daniel said, oh yes, king. My God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths. We notice also the king's life was impacted. Here's the ruler, the king of the largest kingdom in the world at the time, having his life impacted by a former slave, a captive. The king's life was impacted because one man was faithful in spite of an unjust plot. A man of character. But notice, if you will, verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live in all the earth. May your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. You have a man of character. Not only are those close to him having their lives impacted, but also those people impact the lives of others. Oh God, give us more people who will take a stand, who will refuse to compromise when given the opportunity. Is that perhaps why the church is not having more impact on people's lives today? Other people's lives were impacted. Daniel was doing and being what Jesus commanded in Matthew 5, centuries before Jesus came to earth. He was being salt and light in a tasteless and a dark place. We notice also that the enemies lost out. Daniel was put in a lion's den, and not a blooming thing happened to him. The next morning, the king went and he inquired on Daniel, has your God been able to protect you? Oh yeah, God's good. He sent an angel, and they took Daniel out. And notice, if you will, what happened to the enemies of Daniel. It says that his enemies and their whole families, their wives and children, all of them were thrown into the pit. And the Bible tells us that before they hit the ground, the lions had crushed their bones. Whew. Can you imagine? I bet them lions were building up quite an appetite, don't you think? All night long, walking around in that den looking at Daniel. He sure does look tasty. And then looking at the angel. No, better not do that. All night long in that den, walking around looking at Daniel, knowing they better not touch him. But the next morning, when the enemies of Daniel were thrown in, they didn't spare him a bit. My friends, sometimes it seems that the world is winning. And sometimes God delivers us, but there's an awful lot of Christian martyrs as well. People who in certain times and places, the Lord, through his supreme will and wisdom, has decided not to rescue. But I want you to understand that those who harm the children of God will not go unpunished. I don't know. Sometimes I'd like to be like Jesus on the cross and pray, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. But I got to admit, every once in a while, one of David's prayers will slip into my prayer life. God, get them and their parents too. In the end, God takes care of his own. Several lessons that we learn from the life of Daniel. Number one, I want you to understand it's possible to live a pure life in the midst of a thoroughly pagan world. If you make up your mind to serve God, you can do it even in the very center of pagan government. Sometimes I talk with believers who complain about the difficulty of being a Christian in a secular environment. And sometimes they share stories of how they suffer ridicule and humiliation because of their faith. I was talking to a man the other day, talking about how he hated going to work because there's nothing but profanity and blasphemy every day. This morning, Drew was complaining as he headed out the door to a meeting that some folks have no respect or deference for Sunday anymore. Certainly, working with a lot of foul-mouthed folks can get old and wear on you. But at some point you have to say, and we have to tell one another, stop complaining. Stop playing the victim card. Stop talking about how hard you have it. God promises one day we're going to be in heaven. A place where there are no tears and no sorrow and no disappointments and no letdowns. Where there is no death and we never again have to say goodbye. Well, guess what? This ain't it. This is a mission field. And as any missionary can tell you, when you're on the mission field, hardship and difficulties and trials come in the midst of that. Working in a high-rise office building or a construction site isn't like working at a church camp, so be it. We have to face the fact that not everyone shares our faith, and then we have to go on for there. You can live for Christ on the job and in your office and in your classroom and in your neighborhood. There's always a way to compromise for those who want to compromise. And there's always a way to obey God for those who want to obey God. Second, I want you to remember that God can use you to touch unlikely people when you are faithful to Him. Not every unbeliever hates Christians. This account reminds us of that. For every satrap out there planning your downfall, there's a Darius keeping an eye on you, hoping that your faith will prove to be true. For everyone plotting your downfall and hoping you mess up, there was somebody watching you hoping, please. Well, all of the people that I've seen who claim to be Christians, who are two-faced and live two different lives, please, let there be something real to this. Can I find someone, can I work with someone who actually talks and acts out the things they claim to believe? For every person hoping that you fall, there's somebody watching you hoping that you won't. Hoping that there really is something to what you claim to believe, so that they can find a place of hope and help as well. If God can deliver Daniel from the lion's den, He can certainly deliver you. Generations of Christians have taken strength from this account, because in the end the hero isn't Daniel, it's Daniel's God. And the same God who was on the spot and serving at that particular time, ruling and sitting on the throne at that time, is the same God who's sitting on the throne today. And if God can use a slave, a captive like Daniel in a pagan land, He can use you. And so I say to all of you, be of good cheer. Do not fear your enemies and do not fear what they can do to you. Remember the account of Daniel and pray for the same kind of utterly faithful faith. Someone is watching you, and someone else is watching over you. In the days to come, we'll all face hostility in one form or another because of our Christian faith. Those who serve the Lord never have an easy road in this world. In the life of Daniel, we see both the blessing and the burden of an utterly faithful life. He got into trouble because of his faith, but his faith got him out of it. May God give us the same kind of utter faithfulness, so that even our enemies will know we believe and belong to Jesus. Those of you who follow the devotions, I mentioned in a devotion the other day that I have a sign over my desk on which I've copied a number of sayings over the years. One that comes to mind this morning is one that I copied 15 years ago. It says, you will reach no more people and have no more impact than the quality of your life allows. In John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world. Go and live differently than the world and make a difference. Turn the place upside down.